Welcome back to the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Pires coming to you from Baltimore. 1.8 million refugees crossed into Europe in 2015. The number is expected to rise in 2016. This is the largest movement of people since World War II. When I was in Lesbos, Greece last summer, I was told by so many refugees the amount of money that they paid to smugglers to get across to Europe. And today we are lucky to have one expert who's been looking into this. And so let me introduce her, Loretta Napoleoni. She's the author of Merchant of Men: How Jihadists and ISIS Turned Kidnapping and Refugee Trafficking into a multi-billion-dollar business. Of course, much of that is being used by ISIS to fight their wars in Syria, Iraq, and other places. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, Loretta, give us a sense of when the refugee smuggling business started. And in segment 1 and segment 2, we were talking about how the drug trafficking took a hold, of course, in the Middle East and also in Europe. And then we were talking about the kidnapping business as well in earlier segments. But now let's focus on the refugees. How did this start?
It started really from West Africa, where there was always people wanted to come to Europe. In the 1990s also. But I would say that, from 2005 onwards, the number of people wanted to come to Europe across the Sahel and mostly crossing into Italy from Libya or crossing into Spain, of course, from Morocco started to rise. It was a proper exodus to a certain extent because of destabilization taking place in West Africa, destabilization due to, of course, regime falling, but also due to the presence of the cocaine cartel, which increased this process present already. So we see the beginning of this jihadists becoming traffickers in West Africa around this time, so 2005 onwards. But the real success, I would say, of this model, so to become a jihadist, then to be a criminal involved in drug smuggling, and then to become a kidnapper, and eventually, developed into a trafficker. I think, we can see it more than anywhere else in Syria. Because we've seen 1.8 million people who in 2015 actually reached Europe, and about 90% of these people did it through traffickers. So imagine the volume of this business. It's enormous.
Are the traffickers jihadists?
No, the traffickers are not jihadists, but in one way or another, the jihadists make some money, either in the case of the Islamic State, because people cross in their territory, or either because the jihadists, in order to make some money, they will bring the people from the area where they are, for example, Syria, into Turkey and make money. But the actual smugglers, once you get to Turkey, or once you get to Italy, for example, or Greece, are not jihadists. These are a mix of former refugees, migrants, and a very small minority of local people.
And right now, the economy of these countries have totally deteriorated, and people don't have much business, and there's no sense of economy. And so this kind of a business like smuggling refugees has become rather lucrative.
Absolutely.
And how much are people dependent on that, and what's the local economies look like in these places?
Well, you have countries like Somalia, where, of course, it's a failed state. So you have, especially in the north, not so much in the south, because the situation in the south is a bit better. But I would say in the north, you have entire population that survive either, through the smuggling, or, through piracy, which is down very, very much, or through trafficking. So it's a big business. I would say the same thing is for certain parts of Syria. Think about Mosul now. There's 1.2 million people that are on the move, maybe not all immediately, but they will be. Where are these people going to go? There's already 4 million people, displaced people inside Iraq in the various refugees camps. Whoever has some money will try to get to Europe. And this will sustain the economy of the local economy, because they will go from one smuggler to another, because this is also an economy that is quite localized. So people will take you from one village to the border. Then from the border to Istanbul, for example, you will need another group of people. Then from Istanbul to the shores of Greece, another group of people. So it's quite localized, and each time people pay.
And in places like Syria, where normally in this kind of war zones, especially the groups that are local fighting against air and naval forces, want people to remain in these cities because they're somewhat of a shelter for the jihadists who are fighting this war. But in this case, they're dependent on refugees flowing out and the money that makes for them. Why is it in their interest to support that? But because even if they take control of these territories, you would think they want the people to be there that supports them.
Yes, of course they want the people to be there. But if you think about they are Salafists, so they only want the Sunnis, they only want the people that they like. So they want to create a sort of very highly homogeneous society. So they're perfectly happy, and we've seen
this. So they're ethnic cleansing.
Exactly, it's ethnic cleansing. De facto, it's ethnic cleansing. But now the same ethnic cleansing is taking place in the reverse. So we see that the territory which have been reconquered by the Shia, or even by the Kurds, in this territory, they do not want to rebuild the houses of the Sunni, for example. They want the Sunnis to go. So although it's not the same kind of ethnic cleanses that the Islamic State, not so brutal, in reality they're very happy if these people go, because then these places can become 100% Shia or 100% Kurdish. So, and this is a good business for anybody that is involved in this business. And in a country that is collapsing, where there is no economy, where there is very little to live on, if you have a car or if you have a motorcycle and you can take a couple of people across the border and make good money, why not?
Now, Loretta, you've been somewhat instrumental, not only just investigating and writing about these things, that you actually brought together heads of state around the table to discuss this problem and how to stop it in terms of the economy of it. What were the conversations around the table like?
Well, the conversations were various. I mean, all of this happened actually after 9/11, after the bombing of Atocha. So we're talking about quite a long time ago, a decade ago. And at that time, there was no clear understanding of what was really happening. Today, I would say that we are more or less at the same level. There is no understanding because there is no willingness to accept that what is happening is not a phenomenon that is not linked to our history. There's no link to our foreign policy. I mean, this is one of the consequences of the fall of the Berlin Wall. This is one of the consequences of the end of the Cold War. It's not an isolated phenomenon. So most politicians would like to believe that this is an isolated phenomenon. 2005, that was the view. That was unchallenged because, of course, 9/11 was so exceptional. But today, it's still the view, even if it's challenged.
So, is there any end in sight to this kind of political crisis that we are facing throughout the world, not just the Middle East, but really Europe's involved, the United States involved, Russia's involved. This is really a geopolitical issue now. Is there any end in sight?
I think the only end is in the Middle East is negotiation. So forget about exporting democracy, forget about changing the regime in the Middle East, but try to bring about a sort of peace agreements, even if it's not with the governments that we would like to be in that position. So start with peace. Once we get the peace in the Middle East, I think it is time for us to revise our democracy.
And do you think there are players on the other side, in this case, if you're talking about Syria, that negotiating with Assad is the answer and they will come to the table, and negotiating with whom is the question?
Well, I think everybody should come to the table, and everybody means also the jihadists. I think it'd be very, very difficult for many governments to accept that at the moment, but that's the only way forward. I think the real difficulties will be also to get the Gulf states to accept that we want peace, and that if peace means to sit down with everybody, then we'll sit down with everybody. It's always better.
But it's not like the jihadis are going to come to the table to negotiate peace at this point.
Oh, I think the jihadis will come to the table if their sponsor tell them to come to the table.
And their sponsors being Saudis.
They're all sponsors. They're all sponsors. I mean, you know, the Turks are also involved. Palmyra was reconquered by the Islamic State, and apparently it was reconquered because of the help they got, you know, from Turkey. I know this is shocking, but you know, the truth is that these are Sunnis group who are fighting, and you know, they're fighting under the banner of the Islamic State, and they get help wherever they can, and there is always help because the situation is so complex. So I would say instead of killing each other, I think we should try to shout at each other. That would be a step in the right direction.
Obviously, you know, liberals who wants peace, for them, this would be the route to go. But we're talking about now dismantling a multi-billion-dollar business, and various people are invested in it. So just like the ransom, that window may have closed on us in terms of negotiating and coming to some peaceful understanding. It looks like there's too many interests involved in order for this war to go away.
Oh, I think this will go away in the Middle East more easily than, of course, in Europe, because in Europe is a large network. I think we will still get people coming.
You also talk about the political economy of all of this and the benefits for it in terms of Europe itself. I mean, Europe is, you say, is an aging population.
Yes,
It needs workers. Yes, it needs young workers. It needs people that will come and work for a low wage. And all these interests are also being served by the refugee flow.
Yes, but it's now becoming a burden, meaning the number is too high. We cannot absorb 1.8 million every year. It is true that Europe needs by 2060 17 million migrants, but not all in one go. So we have to space them, and we cannot control the way they're coming in. So the best way would be to pacify certain key areas from where they're coming. And then, yes, of course, we will have to deal with that, because the problem, we cannot resolve the problem of West Africa, East Africa, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Bangladesh. We can contain the situation in the Middle East through negotiation, but we still have to have a policy, a foreign policy, towards the migrants. There are many proposals on the table, but the problem is that there is not really, Europe does not have a vision, because Europe, although it is united, at the same time each government, when it comes down to foreign policy or acceptance of migrants, the need of Germany are different from the needs of Italy. So how do you reconcile that? So that is the key issue, how you actually find an harmonious way to proceed about absorbing these people.
All right. Loretta, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And I've been speaking with Loretta Napoleoni, and she's the author of Merchant of Men: How Jihadists and ISIS Turned Kidnapping and Refugee Trafficking into a multi-billion-dollar business. I thank you so much for joining us on the Real News Network.